I now request our chief guest, Professor Ramakrishna Ramaswamy, to kindly deliver the convocation address.
Good morning. Chairman of the Board of Governors, Professor Natu, Director of IISER Kolkata, Professor Saurabh Pal, Deans of the Institute, faculty members, senators, graduating students of the class of 2019, your families and friends. It's a great privilege to be here today, to be able to congratulate all of you, foremost, who have been awarded degrees and medals. This is an important marker in your lives, one that many of you, in fact, all of you, would have worked hard to achieve. But then for all of you, this is just the beginning of the next chapter of your lives. We live in interesting times. This is usually mentioned in the context of being an ancient Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. But I think that our times are really very interesting. Given the pace of advance in the sciences that seems to be happening every week is filled with news of something or the other, which is just wonderful. In the last few months, I've been excited, as I'm sure all of you have, to see this image of a black hole. More recently, in the last couple of weeks, we have news that room temperature superconductivity might actually be a reality. Fingers crossed, toes, eyes, everything crossed, but this is exciting. A few more months back, we heard and saw gravitational waves, the chirp. We saw about the Higgs boson, we saw gene editing, CRISPR-Cas. Every field has something or the other. There's water on the moon, there's water on Mars. I mean, not just that it must be there, but we know that it is there. And this has only been possible through the various advances that we've had in different branches of science. The excitement is real, and it goes across the ages. And for those of you who are graduating today, there's some lines from Wordsworth which are really appropriate. Wordsworth was alive during the French Revolution, and 10 years later he wrote a poem which was never published. It's called The Prelude. And there he says, "Bliss it was in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Bliss indeed it is to live in this age, but to be young." There's so much happening in the world of science. It's a very good time to be a young scientist. Many of you will choose a life in science. Some of you have already committed, that is PhD wallahs, have already committed to a life in research. But given your initial conditions, it's doubtless that science will, in some way or the can I have some water, please? Yeah. Science will, in some way or the other, be central to your way of thinking. What you've imbibed over the past few years will stay with you and shape your approach to life. There are so many discoveries to be made, so much more to learn, and this is just the beginning. A commitment to a scientific way of life is vital. You would have heard more than once that ours is the only country to have it enshrined in our constitution that it is important to have the need to have a scientific temper. A scientific temperament is a great asset regardless of what one does. But doing science itself is of great value. We've seen that our lives have, on average, more than on average, been immeasurably improved by science and the methods of science, and overall by a commitment to science. On occasion, we see some people, usually those with access to the news media, profess that science is not all that important, but I don't believe that this is the feeling of the average Indian. The average Indian believes very strongly in the transformative power of science. Ask anybody who wants a cell phone. The widespread support for the IITs and IISERs that we find in our society is really part of this belief. We need to have more of you, many more of you, so that you can contribute to the development of science in the country and to the development of the country. Your institute is young and it's very special, as the chairman just pointed out, and that's a great advantage. The idea of your institute is also young, so that it can rise to new challenges and can adapt to the changes that these times require with the agility that only the young truly possess. My own academic career has largely been spent in a very different kind of institute. I've been at JNU, as was mentioned. It's a central university where the sciences have to learn to coexist with the humanities, the languages, other disciplines, what we often disparagingly call arts walas. So I think that there is some advantage in such an environment. At the very least, you learn to have a respect for another way of thinking. But speaking from my own personal experience, the diversity that this institution has when you have other disciplines is very significant and very instructive. And so I'd like to particularly congratulate the director for having announced that you're going to start a Department of Humanities. I think it's an extremely important step because it's not just that you should learn to respect those who do the social sciences. They ultimately rule the world anyhow. So you learn to have a lot of respect for them. But I think a different way of thinking that they bring, or not they bring, that instruction in such disciplines brings is valuable. Much of my own thinking about academia has been molded by the uniqueness of my experience of being at JNU and at the University of Hyderabad, and the opportunities that that provided to me. But to speak of change and the challenges that changes bring, there's a saying in French that the more things change, the more they stay the same. But that's said long ago in another language, and I think it's wrong. The more things change, actually, the more things change. And we have to learn to adapt. In the past 2 decades, a period which encompasses this institute's life alone, the academic workplace has changed very fundamentally, both the laboratory and the classroom. Part of this has been because of the way in which our country has evolved, but another and more important part has been of the way in which the world has evolved. The role of the teacher has changed very drastically in the past few years, has slowly but surely changed with this changing world, the changes in communication and the increased mobility. Y'all have gone out and won competitions at Harvard. I mean, how cool is that? Couldn't have been done in an earlier day and age. So this has had some very positive things. Collaborative science has enabled the pursuit of bigger problems. Synthetic biology is one of the big frontiers that we have, and it's something worth doing. The solitary scientists working on individual problems is rare outside a few disciplines, and large multidisciplinary groups working on ambitious projects are the norms in others. Papers co-authored across national boundaries are very commonplace, and I'm sure many over here have done that. but those with over 1,000 authors now coming into biology. I would not have thought that even possible, but that's true today. But more importantly, we are connected in a manner which is global in its essence, in its fundament. And international institutions are fond of articulating grand challenges to highlight the global nature of several problems. I already noticed in the director's report that you all are sensitive to these. Climate change is not going to be restricted to a few nations. It's already hit us this summer, 48 degrees in Delhi. Global warming is not only real, local warming is very, very real, and we all suffer from it. And it will affect all of us regardless of our individual carbon footprints. Of course, it's good that you conserve, use less plastics, even as I reach out for some water. But still, it's going to affect all of us. The damaged environment, pollution, this affects all of us, rich and poor alike. Water scarcity will recognize no national boundaries. And tackling such issues is going to require our collective efforts and our collective resources. How we are going to solve them, we don't know, but what is clear is we're going to need a multiplicity of institutions to tackle this and to show the way forward. Our graduates, namely you, have got to be seen as part of a global cohort, and you must be prepared to be part of a global cohort. An institution such as IISER Kolkata and all the IISERs, or all institutions, can play a leadership role in this context. Many of the problems can only be addressed through basic research, and research that integrates the natural sciences as well as the social sciences, both with each other and within themselves. This needs to be done proactively. Tomorrow cannot wait. Speaking of which, and this is largely addressed to the teachers of this institution, are we still hidebound to a classic ideal of narrow categories of disciplines within which teaching happens? This needs to be debated because there are really no easy answers. What are the exciting areas of the future? What are the skills that students are going to need to tackle these problems? And do we teach too much? Could we teach less and allow students to learn more? Do we permit the student the option to explore what she or he may want to learn as opposed to what we decide that they have to learn? The changing boundaries of subjects are kind only to those who are prepared and willing to take the plunge. In recent times, and an Indian, so I can't be accused of choosing an example from some other space, a spectacular cross-disciplinarian, Venki Ramakrishnan, who was my contemporary. His undergraduate was in physics, his PhD was in physics. He worked in biology, and his Nobel Prize was in chemistry. The chairman of the BOG has already alluded to the interdisciplinarity of our fields. But this is an Indian, and it was 50 years ago that this happened in our country. This kind of ability to flip and change. This may have been more by accident than by design, but we need many, many happy accidents. There are other changes that we need to recognize at this time. The reality of India of tomorrow and the changing demography. India has the largest proportion, and you would have heard this many times, the largest percentage of young people, those who are wanting skills and education and learning. Increasing numbers of those seeking higher education will necessarily be first-generation learners. I was a first-generation college goer in my family. That may be true for some of you. But increasingly, there will be first-generation literates. There will be first-generation, not only school goers, college goers, and so on. How does the classroom change to teach such people, such of us? I found my environment that allowed me to go to college very conducive and inviting. Similarly, how we adapt our classrooms to address the first generation will determine how well we prepare ourselves for the future. But today really is about those of you who are graduating, those who are on the brink of a new tomorrow. It is traditional in commencement addresses to give some sort of, advice. People have pointed me to Steve Jobs and, Kurt Vonnegut and so on and so forth. So I will tell you, please wear sunscreen. It's very important. Protect yourselves. These are important, but there's a lovely poem that I'd like to share with you. I'm not going to share all of it, and I love this poem. It's by Constantine Cavafy. It was originally written in Greek and then translated into English. And it says something about the journeys that we are all part of. And I'll read some of it because it is a wonderful poem. When you set out for Ithaca, ask that your way be long, full of adventure, full of instruction. The Lystrigonians and the Cyclops, angry Poseidon, do not fear them. Such as these you will never find as long as your thought is lofty, as long as a rare emotion touch your spirit and your body. Ask that your way be long, and at many a summer dawn to enter with what gratitude, with what joy, ports seen for the first time. Have Ithaca always in your mind. Your arrival there is what you are destined for. Don't in the least hurry the journey. Better it last for years. So, do choose your goals that are ambitious. Ask questions for which answers are worth knowing. Spend the time needed in order to resolve them. And there will be distractions aplenty, Cyclops and Lystrigonians. Disregard them. Take it slow. The goal is the thing. Thank you.